So welcome people across Canada. Excited to have you all here on this, what appears to be a generally snowy, foggy, blustery day in Canada. And excited to have everybody here for this Housing First Community of Practice webinar. The topic of today was meaningful daily activity, which we'll get into in a few moments. As I said before, we've got some housekeeping things to take care of, which I'll get into in a second. Just want to share with you the agenda for our meeting. So I'm going to provide a brief land acknowledgement based on where I'm coming from, go through some housekeeping items. I'm going to provide an introduction to the topic, which might be less than 5 minutes. And then I'm going to share about 20 minutes worth of content with you around the topic of meaningful daily activity. And then I really hope that we can have a lot of interaction in the remaining 25 or so minutes before we close out the webinar. I really want to hear from you people. The point of a community of practice is that we get to hear from those of you. We can share with each other, we can give input. What I'm going to provide for you, hopefully, is just a stimulus to the ideas that we're talking about, some interesting points and information that I think will be helpful for you. But in the end, it's really to try to trigger your expertise and knowledge and understanding, as well as challenges that you're facing, so that we can talk about them and be helpful to each other across the country and in different programs. So without further delay, I mentioned I want to do a land acknowledgement, and I'm doing this based on where I live. It would be difficult for me to cover everyone, but I feel it's important to acknowledge that I am working and coming to you from Lethbridge, Alberta, which resides on Treaty 7 territory, the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Nations, which include Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai, and the Tsuut'ina Nation and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations. And I also acknowledge that all of the many First Nations, Métis and Inuit, whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. It's very important for us here at the Canadian Alliance to do our part in terms of reconciliation, in terms of understanding the importance of recognizing who we're here working with, working to support, and the land that we work and live on and play on, and where that came from and the history behind all of that. So that's the information from my territory, from my area. Just a brief bit of housekeeping here around the controls. You should see something similar to this either at the top or the bottom of your screens. I'm sure you've all used Zoom enough now that you understand all of this. You will see that we have the chat feature. What I'd like to do is suggest that you use the chat feature for any just general communication. If you want to, just mention something that you want everybody to hear or see or whatever. But we also have the Q&A feature. And so if you can remember, and it'll help me to keep better track of things, if you can remember to use the Q&A feature, if there is a particular question or comment that you want brought out and discussed. And that will help me sort through the information. And in addition to other housekeeping, again, I will remind you we are recording. So the recording and the slides will be available by tomorrow through the Training and Technical Assistance website, which is at training.caeh.ca. And if you are feeling okay with sharing your question out loud, maybe indicate that in the Q&A section when you type in your question or comment, because I would love to integrate more people talking in the webinar. But if not, that's okay. We'll just discuss it. But I really want to get people's thoughts on this particular topic. Just a tiny bit about The Canadian Alliance, you've all probably seen this slide multiple times. These are all of the components that are incorporated now into our organization. Of course, training and technical assistance is my area, the program that I am the director of. And we have Built for Zero. We have the conference, which sadly, due to many things related to COVID, had to be canceled and postponed. We are now planning on a conference of some type in November of 2021. We have our allied networks, which is multiple organizations that we support on a more in-depth level and that are involved as partners in the work that we're doing. And then of course we have the advocacy component to our organization where we're doing lots of lobbying and other things. And right now we have our Recovery for All campaign that's going on. And I'm hoping that many of you have seen the videos and things that have been posted on social media about that and have had an opportunity to look at that. If you haven't, go to our website, click on any of those areas and you'll get more information. As far as the training and technical assistance program, our mission, of course, is very simple, and that is helping communities and organizations end homelessness with expert training and technical assistance. Now, to get into our topic of the day, which, as I said, was meaningful daily activity, I want to share with you a true story. And this story is something that I am stealing from somebody that is a colleague of mine that I've worked with in the past, that is part of my training faculty. And this is a story that they have often told, and maybe you've heard this story before, but this is related to work that has happened in their community from a frontline housing first perspective. And this is how it goes. Like many of us have seen in our various programs, this Housing First program had an individual that they were on the verge of, the program was on the verge of discharging this individual from the program. And the reason for that was, like we often see or hear about, due to a lack of engagement, due to the inability or what appeared to be an unwillingness from this individual to connect with and work with the program. This individual was an Indigenous man, a little bit of an older man, and he had been evicted from housing that the organization had helped him to find multiple times. But once he was in housing, he was not open to connecting with the worker. And as I said, the agency was on the verge of saying, okay, well, we can't work with this person anymore. But the person who was assigned to his caseload, bless their heart, really felt like that, you know what, this is an issue, I think, of mine. This is an issue of us as an organization. And I think that we need to do more to try to reach out and connect. And so this worker thought and thought and thought about, what do I know about this person? I don't know a lot because I haven't been able to connect with them very much. But one thing I do know is that he really enjoys going down to the river bottom and looking at rocks and just exploring in the river bottom. And so he went and he found a way to connect with him, and he made a deal with him. And he said, listen, for whatever reason, I know that this is hard for you and that you don't necessarily want to see me or see us very often. But in order for us to be able to best support you, it's really important that we have more of an opportunity to connect and talk to you, and to be able to sometimes come to your home, you know, as long as you're okay with that, to be able to help you, to be able to recognize things that you might need assistance with, or you know, just to understand how things are going for you in your home. So I'll tell you what, I know that it's hard for you to get there. So how about we do this? If you let me come to your house once a week and just let me come in and chat with you for 15 minutes, then I'll drive you to the river bottom and we can go for a walk on the river bottom. And so this man thought about it and he thought, okay, you know what, fair enough, because he really liked to do that. So as they were doing this, the times that he would spend in the man's home, he started noticing that these rocks were gathering on his windowsill in his apartment. And so he started to talk to him about these rocks and what they meant to him. And what he said to him was, these rocks, I see in them part of the earth. I see in them animals and creatures and those kinds of things. And he said, so that's why they intrigued me. And it makes me feel connected, helps me feel connected to the land. And he said, and so the worker asked him, what do you want to do with these? What do you plan to do with these rocks? And he says, well, I don't know. But he said, like I said, I see different things in them and I'd love to be able to paint those. I'd love to be able to do some artwork on these rocks. And so the worker then arranged to help him get a hold of some paints and supplies and things like that. And so this man started painting rocks and painting these animals based on what he would see in the rocks with nothing on them. And they were amazing. They were fabulous. And then another thing happened is that while they were down walking along the river bottom, they came across another indigenous couple, another older couple that were doing almost the same thing. They were just connecting with the land and they were loving being down there. And so they ended up having a conversation with this couple. And it turned out that this couple actually had a booth at the local farmers market. And they found out what he was doing with these rocks. And they invited him to actually come to the farmers market. And if he wanted, he could share their booth with them and he could sell his artwork on these rocks. And so this man started going and they developed a friendship. And it got to the point where if he didn't show up at the farmer's market one week, that this couple would then make a point of going to his house to just check on him and make sure he was okay. And they really created this relationship. And it ended up that this man was able to maintain his housing for years, based almost solely on the idea that he had something that was important and valuable to him that he could engage in on a regular basis, that also created relationships and connections for him. And that made the difference. So with that story in mind, what is meaningful daily activity? Well, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence in the United Kingdom says this, that it includes any physical, social, and leisure activities that are tailored to the person's needs and preferences. Activity can range from activities of daily living, such as dressing, eating, and washing, to leisure activities such as reading, gardening, arts and crafts, conversation, and singing. It can be structured or spontaneous for groups or individuals and may involve families, friends, and carers, or the wider community. Activity may provide emotional, creative, intellectual, and spiritual stimulation. It should take place in an environment that is appropriate to the person's needs and preferences, which may include using outdoor spaces or making adaptations to the person's environment. And there's a link there to where this information was taken from if you want to look at that later. So I think it's important to remember that we can't confuse meaningful daily activity with essential daily activity. That doesn't mean that essential daily activity isn't sometimes meaningful daily activity. But an example that I often use is with work. I've had jobs that were definitely essential because they paid the bills, but not necessarily very meaningful. And why is that? And I think that we have to remember that when we're working with our participants. to try not to force upon them activities that are based on what we believe are necessary or essential versus what really is meaningful. So what makes something meaningful? Well, Emily Smith wrote this book, The Power of Meaning, and she outlines some key things that are related to what makes something meaningful. First one is belonging, which includes relationships, and things that bond us to one another, and where there's this mutuality of care and support. Somebody in the end feels very valued by other people. And then there's purpose. So what's related to purpose is that our basic life goals, our primary goals that we have in life, involve some way that we are giving to other people, that we are serving other people and contributing to other people. And then she also talks about storytelling. And this is an interesting one because she says that when we weave experiences into larger narratives that define who we are and where we come from, that makes a big difference for us. It helps us to understand how we make sense of the world around us. Because the stories of our lives are what create who we are. And so we create meaning or get meaning based on the stories that we tell about ourselves. And those stories are not just stories of our experiences, but stories or narratives about who we are because of what we've experienced. And then the last one area that she talks about is transcendence. And when we look at transcendence, this is about light bulbs, moments of aha or moments of awe, as she says, self-loss and wonder, when we feel connected to something bigger than ourselves. And those are moments of transcendence, and those are moments of meaning. And so when we look at these four areas, how do we build those into our lives, or how do we help our participants build those into their own lives? So think about that. How do we help them feel a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose? How do we help them identify and understand the stories or narratives of their lives and act and move forward in relation to those? And how do we help them to not only experience these moments of awe or transcendence, but to understand them and to be aware of them? So Aaron M. Eekman wrote an article called Relationships Between Meaningful Activity, Basic Psychology, and sorry, I have to move my picture, and Meaning in Life, Test of the Meaningful Activity and Life Meaning Model. And in that article, there was a couple of quotes that really stood out to me. And what Aaron talked about was the importance when we look at meaningful activity in terms of the subjective experience and the unique and identifiable qualities that are related to somebody. And then in the second quote I have outlined, it talks about personal meanings, an individual's disposition to find importance, and based on how they interpret the situations in their lives. So what does that all mean? Well, I think that really highlights an important component that we talk a lot about, and that is being person-centered. We can help people have more meaningful daily activities in their lives once they're housed, prior to their housing, after they're housed, by making sure that the work that we do with them is continually person-centered. It is driven by them. So when we set our goals with them, it is person-centered. When we talk about what it is that they want to do after they're housed, it is person-centered. It is not expert-centered or expert-based. That's when people will experience things that are meaningful in their lives, is when we base it on what they want and what they identify that they need. So what incorporates, meaningful activity? Well, we've got things associated with work. There's self-care. We can build in meaningful activity by getting involved in things that are related to self-care, leisure activities, and then in addition, rest and or restoration types of activities. And that's kind of a four-pronged approach to the different categories that meaningful daily activity can fall in. And I think this is really important when we talk about the housing first philosophical approach of the recovery orientation and what that means. Because a recovery orientation is what incorporates all of those areas. When we talk about recovery and housing first philosophy, we're not talking about people being able to address their addiction issues or mental health issues. Those are only two pieces of recovery, but recovery is that entire gambit of wellness and a holistic approach to a person's life and well-being. And so all those areas, work, leisure, self-care, and rest and restoration, those are all that sort of whole wellness approach to recovery. So this is another article by Eric McNaughton out of Vancouver. I've worked with Eric multiple times. He's a great guy, and he had lots of involvement in the at-home chez soi study. And the article was, how does Housing First contribute to recovery for people who have been homeless? And these are some of the key things that he highlighted, where he said there's three transitions that are important to be paying attention to. First, there's a transition from street to home. And so we have to remember that many of these people's lives, before they leave the street, are based on just survival. And I've talked in many trainings that I've done about and connecting Daniel Siegel's hand model of the brain to our work with people who've been experiencing homelessness. Because what he talks about is our amygdala that is housed inside of the brain, attached to the brainstem, and then the prefrontal cortex fits over top of that. But the amygdala is what controls the fight or flight. And if people are experiencing stress, or if they are in survival mode day after day after day, then our brain is designed in a way that's supposed to help us to kick out the prefrontal cortex or disengage from the prefrontal cortex, or as Daniel Siegel says, we flip our lid so that the amygdala can take over and help us to survive, help us make those fight, flight, or freeze choices, if you want to even call them choices. But that's how we survive. And it's not until we come out of that survival mode into a sense of peace and safety that our prefrontal cortex will re-engage, and that it will allow our brain to now start thinking rationally and problem solving and those kinds of things. And so then that's where we get, once we come out of that survival mode into this sense of peace and safety, then we have this transition from home to community, where people can settle into routines and they can actually start thinking about what it means to be productive. Because before that, productivity didn't matter. It was, how do I make it to tomorrow? And then as one of the quotes of somebody who they interviewed from the at-home chez soi study shows, they talked about doing stuff that matters and how important that was to them in that transition from home to community. And interesting, I'll tell you a quick story. We did a fidelity review in a community in Manitoba years ago, a Housing First fidelity review. And as part of fidelity reviews, we have participant focus groups where we'll sit down with up to 10 individuals who have been part of a Housing First program and just interview them, ask them questions about what it was like being in the program and how the program was helpful for them and so forth. And one of the questions that we often ask is, now that you're housed, what do you feel is important for you next? And in this particular case, we asked, now that you're off the street, what's important for you? And the response was astounding, because the response was, well, now that we're off the street, we need to get off the street. And as we thought about that, we were blown away by how profound that was, and how often we have seen this, where we get focused on housing and we get them into housing, and then we kind of forget that actually our work is just beginning. And now people need to have that meaningful stuff in their lives, and they're actually able to think about that meaningful stuff in their lives. And so then that moves us into the transition from the present to a future focused life. So more involvement in the community, and that ends up turning into the ability to think into the future. Because again, if you go back to the transition from street to home, there isn't a lot of thinking about the future. It's about, how do I stay safe right now? But once these things occur, if we are building it properly with them, they can actually start having future thinking. And then as they do that and they build trust with us, their confidence grows and their sense of control grows, and their ability to think better about themselves increases. And then they become hopeful about their lives. And they also see the potential in possibly reclaiming lost parts of their life, or things that maybe they used to have in the past, whether that was a job or a hobby or whatever it might be. But those things start to become possibilities. So in this article, the impact of social and cultural activities on the health and well-being of homeless people, these were some of the key findings. Culture was key. It had a significant contribution into better health outcomes, and helping people feel like they were repairing their sense of community, and their ability to be sustained within those communities. Meaningful activities and social and cultural activities were a huge factor in helping to reduce a sense of isolation, promoting, again, connection and social networks, and that feeling of self-esteem and communication skills. It helped improve mental health. So they saw changes in their levels of depression, and again, isolation, and relaxation, and better sleep patterns. And sleep is so important, because we've learned over time from research that when we have better sleep, it actually allows our brain to move from not only helping to heal your body, but helping to heal itself. And so a lot of those things that are sort of brain-based challenges can improve the more relaxation and sleep we get. Greater life satisfaction. And also, these activities provided a temporary distraction from use of substances and addiction issues. So that was helpful in and of itself. So with all of that being said, I want to just sort of throw out there now these questions. What examples do you have in your communities or in your programs for how you have been able to effectively incorporate true, meaningful daily activity into your program or system of care? And what are some of the challenges or barriers that you face in your efforts to incorporate more helpful, meaningful daily activity? So with those two questions in mind, I'm kind of an open book. Let's talk about this. So again, in the Q&A, if you can, feel free, like start throwing things out there, or let me know if you want to comment on something. I think it's important, as I kind of wait for people to chime in, I think it's important for us to realize that in order for this to happen, we as organizations or we as systems of care in our communities have to be willing to look at our policies and look at our processes to make adjustments and shifts to allow this to happen. We have to allow organizations to be more creative in the way that they do things. And just like my example of the man with the rocks, that would not have been able to happen if they would have been forced to adhere to their system policy of that if someone hasn't engaged with us in X amount of time, then we need to discharge them. They were given the flexibility to keep trying. And I would say that most of the time, our efforts in that area are hindered because we don't have the ability to keep trying. But one of the biggest problems that's generally at play is there still hasn't been enough trust built between the participant and the program or the worker in order to be able to make some of these things happen. So we have to allow that flexibility. We have to work with funding models to make sure that people have resources to be able to create some of these opportunities within their systems. So it looks like Dawn has said one challenge in supporting clients in their identification of meaningful daily activity is that it is easy to become distracted by temporary crisis. So I want to, Dawn, feel free to unmute yourself if you're willing to talk, because I think this is an important topic. Would you say any more about that, Dawn? And again, unmute yourself and feel free to talk. If you can't, I may have to unmute you. So, so there, I just clicked allow you to talk. So now you should be able to unmute yourself, Dawn, and speak if you're open to that. In the meantime, while you sort of think that over, this is a common issue. And again, if I go back to fidelity reviews that we have done, we often see this as a challenge where people are faced with, they feel like they're firefighting all the time. And it's very difficult for them to get to a place where they're actually working on these meaningful things. So in a sense, what happens is people come into their program, they get them housed, and then they are still in survival mode, even though they're housed. And I think the question is what's keeping them in survival mode, even though they now have a safer place to be? And one of the common problems that we find, or one of the common denominators that we find in programs that find that they are in crisis mode with their clients on a regular basis, is again this idea of, have the goals that have been set truly been driven by that individual? And then the second thing is, are we making enough effort to connect with them in their home, or have that sort of home visit component to our interactions with them? So again, I'm very open to other comments and thoughts in relation to that. And Dawn, again, if you have more you want to say, please feel free. I'm going to go on here to Angie, who has said, have you thought of hiring people that have success stories, how they came out of the streets to work along with workers, just for them to see that in fact it is possible to do so? Thank you so much, Angie, for bringing that up, because another factor that has come out of some of these articles and studies associated with helping to integrate meaningful daily activity into the work with homeless is incorporating people with lived experience or lived expertise into our staffing, and ensuring also that the people who we are working with are part of developing and informing some of these activities that are happening and leading those activities. But there's a huge power in people being able to say, I've been there and I get it, and even describe what it was like for them. So again, So Dawn, I see you're saying you don't know how to unmute. There's a little microphone button. Um, I clicked the button to allow you to do that. So all you should have to do is click your mic button and it should unmute you, but you might not have a working microphone in whatever device you're using. So I apologize for that. Tammy Stewart says, I often find it challenging to incorporate more meaningful activities because some participants don't engage with us at times. And when they do, it usually because of crisis happening. So Tammy, I'm going to unmute you as well. I'm going to allow you to talk and see if you want to just add verbally out loud to that conversation. So there, Tammy, you should be able to unmute yourself now and speak if you want.
Yeah, can you hear me? I think I did that right.
Yep, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, it's just, so I'm actually very new to this role, or new to the agency. I've only been here since September the 8th, but I have already noticed the trend of, when they move in, they engage with you, just to kind of get settled in. And once they're all settled, it kind of just breaks down from there. It's the constant trying to reach out, doing door knocks, and being unsuccessful. And then, you get this text message saying this is happening, or this is broken, or this is leaking. And it seems to be that's the only time we get to engage, is when something's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how, you set these appointments with them and say, okay, meet me here. And I try to be very transparent. I said, I respect your time, so I just ask that you respect mine. If there's for any reason that you can't make an appointment, just tell me, we can reschedule. But they ghost you and then you show up and no one's there. So it's a little hard, because I would love to do these meaningful activities. There is one participant that I have that I've been able to do meaningful activities with them, and it's great. It's just, how do I get them to show up?
What do you think was the difference, if any, that you can identify with that one person than with some of the others?
Definitely the other, I only have 3 on my caseload. 2 out of the 3 don't really engage very much. I just think it's the level of acuity. Some are like, one is lower acuity and the other ones are fairly high, but still can comprehend and actually participate, and is capable of, like, simple things. Because I've spoken to them about it before and they've agreed with me, and then we've set these appointments, but they just don't keep them.
Yeah. Well, and again, I'll go back to this idea that I think that we often shoot ourselves in the foot with some of our procedures that we put in place around what it means to have engagement,
Right.
and I think that oftentimes our organizations are not given the flexibility and the freedom to just keep trying without fear of sort of either funding or other kinds of repercussions that might come because we're not moving people through the system fast enough, or we're not getting enough people off of our by name list or off of our homeless lists into programs fast enough, and that kind of thing. And so we can't afford to keep people that aren't engaging on our caseloads, because as I said, this trust issue is huge, and it takes a long time for these folks, even though, I mean, it seems like, okay, how does this make sense? They're willing to talk to us to get access to housing, but then as soon as they've got housing, they've shut the door. Well,
Right.
getting access to housing is still part of a survival mechanism, right? So people will do whatever it takes to survive, but then they have to build that trust. They have to build in that ability, or learn that ability to realize that, wait a minute, this is different than the way it used to be. Because for them, it's sort of once bitten, twice shy, only instead it's like 10 times bitten, and they've had bad experiences and have been pushed down so many times that it's difficult for them to believe and trust that and it's not about you as a person, but it's about you as a system or as an organization, are going to be any different than the way it was before, right? It's like, I don't trust it. So I would rather I get in, okay, I've got a place to live. not realizing that they're still going to face those issues. But the longer we can stick with it, the longer we can continue to go back and go back and go back and go back, even when it seems hopeless, eventually, in my experience, and it doesn't happen every single time, but for a lot of these people, eventually something starts to click, and then they start to ease up and let the walls down little by little by little. And that's what you have to be allowed to do as a worker. And that's what makes the work in this field so much different than a lot of other fields, is because you have to be working against what seems like common sense or what experts often tell you, right? And so it's mostly about time. But I think that another piece to this is what I was saying earlier about that the minute people go into housing, we tend to want to either step away and give them space, or we want to go right into this idea of, okay, so here's what needs to be improved. And as opposed to taking the time and really discovering what it is that they want. And that conversation can happen even during, sort of the housing process, if they're able to even think about that. But it's important to get to that place. I often tell another story about this woman who was in a very similar situation to this man that I talked about, who, when they actually finally started to talk to her about what she wanted as opposed to what they thought needed to be worked on, she wanted to learn how to do fingernails. And as much as they hated giving into that, after doing it, it turned out that it made all the difference in the world. Right? So, it's a tough challenge for sure. And I get where you're coming from. And I don't know that there's a simple solution, but it's time. It's time and continued effort. I'm going to go on here to Megan, who says, I'm lucky enough to work on an ACT team as a recreation therapist. So this whole topic is my job. Some successful strategies. Okay, you know what, Megan, I'm going to unmute you, and I'm going to let you talk a little bit about this, if you will. Let me just find you here quickly. Here you are. Okay. So Megan, if you're okay with it, you should be able to unmute yourself now and speak. And so maybe you could just talk to what you wrote in the Q&A. I hope. Or I hope there you are.
Awesome. Is this working now?
It is. It is.
Oh, good. Yeah, so I'm super lucky because like I said, I worked on an ACT team, so we don't face quite as many barriers with regards to things like needing to discharge people or kind of get them through the program. So people in my program
you see the benefit of having that time to actually work with them as long as you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. So like some people have been in our program for like 10 years. So you really have the opportunity to build that rapport, which is so important. But some of the things that I mentioned that I've just kind of small things that are helpful. So what I found is that a lot of our clients they didn't grow up like playing soccer and piano and doing art and stuff that like maybe are things that I got to do. So when you ask them about what do you like to do for fun or leisure, they don't really have that many options because they just don't have those skills or those experiences. So we do a lot of leisure sampling to be like, here's this activity, let's try it. If you like it, we can keep going. If you don't like it, we'll try something else. Yeah. So that's been pretty helpful. And then kind of with that too, if somebody says, oh, I like exercising, and you're like, okay, let's go to the gym. If they haven't been to a gym, like maybe not ever, or maybe not in the last however many years, that's actually like a really scary thing. So how do you break that into like these pieces of, okay, well today we're just going to take the bus there, and then next time we're going to go in and we'll look at the layout, And then maybe the third time we'll actually do a workout. So just breaking it up into these like more manageable pieces, and that you're not taking for granted. Oh, everyone knows what going to go workout is like.
Yeah, totally. And actually one of my staff, his name is Quinn. When he talks about, person-centered goals, he kind of highlights that point by saying that oftentimes what we initially believe is sort of more of an immediate goal is actually a long-term goal. So going to the gym is a long-term goal, whereas the short-term steps to get to that goal are those things that you're talking about, and that's what we need to focus on, right? But we kind of just see as going to the gym as, okay, well, let's do that. And yeah, people get overwhelmed, or it's frightening, or whatever the case is, and we don't build step by step on those things. Yeah, great example. Thank you for sharing that information. It's really helpful, coming from somebody who works on an ACT team, like you say, who isn't bound by some of those restrictions that a lot of other programs sometimes are. I also had Shayla say that that they had an example. So Shayla, I'm going to unmute you. I don't know if I can find you. Where did you go? There you go. So Shayla, you should be able to unmute yourself now. So feel free. Love to hear your example.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll try to be quick with this one. It's kind of a client I'm currently working with, but basically what had happened was when they were first intaked into the program, when I first met with them, they talked about wanting a job and going back to school as kind of a passion or an interest or that they wanted to pursue. As they got into housing, crisis started to happen, other requirements, even, requirements from the program, assessments, that kind of stuff. And I feel like we kind of lost traction or kind of sight of that passion and that kind of other goal that could really lead to meaningful activity. And now as time has come on, they're starting, substance use is up. They're not as, like, I'm not able to get in touch with them as easily. They're kind of more distant. And I think, this is my assumption is also with substance use and everything changing, maybe there's a bit of shame. I'm not too sure. Again, it's an assumption because I haven't been able to speak with them for a bit, but I think that it kind of made me realize that during, like, after they got housed, we should have found a way to make space for that schooling and that passion, that activity that would have been meaningful and give them, motivation and inspiration, because the income crisis and other requirements and assessments and everything, that stuff was important, but I think also kind of, I guess, pulled away from that next step after being housed. So I really think that it was interesting though, because I really noticed their passion at the beginning of our relationship, because they just put it out there when they were kind of like, this is my, I'm aspiring to, this is what I want to do at some point, or this is something that I'm interested in. But I really like what was just said about like breaking it into manageable pieces, because I think it's true. We tend to kind of mix up short-term versus long-term goals. So I really like that. And I'm hoping to kind of, I'm just persistent and consistent right now with trying to reconnect. And when I do, I think it's a matter of kind of slowing down with, all those other things that we've been focusing on, but also kind of revisiting, when we first met, you said you were interested in getting a job in school. Can we talk a bit more about that? Or how would you feel about, talking about that? Because I think, yeah, it would kind of reconnect, just again, going to that person-centered practice.
Yeah. Great example. And that's actually exactly what I was thinking as you were talking was, yeah, I wonder what the likelihood is that even though they were motivated initially, that what was being focused on at first was a little too far in the future for them, and maybe it ended up feeling like, example I often use is if you're climbing Mount Everest, and if you're always looking at the top, it never looks like you're getting any closer. Right?
Yeah, and I think it felt very, they were very motivated at the beginning, but then as all these other things come up after housing, that transition and learning about those other, housing skills and everything, I think it almost made, that Everest seem so much bigger for that, that kind of passion to pursue, because, well, there's all this other stuff going on and that feels more important. But really, without having that meaningful activity or that meaningful, goal that client was passionate about, I think they've kind of lost, I don't know, some motivation maybe, or like I said, substance use went up because I think there's a lot more boredom. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Thank you for that. And, people would have seen in the description of this webinar where we talked about how, in our experience, we've seen that the two biggest reasons that people fall out of housing seems to be related to boredom and loneliness. And so another sort of housing first philosophical element that comes into play there is, and it's part of the recovery orientation as well, but it's community and social integration, and that the more people and the faster people can feel connected. And again, this goes back to even dealing with substance use and addiction and things like that. We've all had hammered into our heads that really the antidote or the opposite of addiction is connection. And so that connection piece is so important. And so the sooner we can help someone feel connected to not only their community, but to other individuals that are sort of healthy individuals in their lives. And if you look at things from a strength-based perspective, there's a model from a strength-based perspective that suggests that the first thing we should do when we look at integrating supports into someone's life is to look at what's coming from their natural innate abilities and their natural support system around them, family, friends, those kinds of things. And not even try to incorporate more specialized supports into the mix until we see that there's either not enough of those natural supports or that we still need more. And it's only until you get to that point that then you start incorporating, more specialized supports into things. But we have to capitalize on what resources they have available within themselves and in their natural support network first. Because again, those are the things that are going to stick, as opposed to, having someone else always coming into the picture. That's harder for them to grab onto. So this community and social connection piece is going to be huge. And so we often say that should be the first thing you do. When you get somebody housed, whatever you can to help them feel connected to other individuals. And I'll share this one last little concept with you that we've shared in other contexts, but it's called know, known, and missed. So this is something that I learned actually years ago in a conference with someone who was speaking about community development. And I found this to be very helpful in working with the people who experience homelessness as well, is that when you move someone into a new place, that if you focus on, first of all, helping to make sure that they know two people in their immediate neighborhood, whether it's in their apartment building or whatever it is, but two people in their immediate neighborhood by name. So they know two people by name. And then you help to ensure that there are two other people in that immediate neighborhood that know your participant or your client by name. So now they're known. And then you do whatever you can to support them in the process to be in a place where if they're away from their community or neighborhood for any length of time, that people notice. And so then they're missed. And if you can incorporate those three things, you've got a pretty solid foundation of somebody being connected into their neighborhood. And I would also just add, in terms of seeking out ideas for meaningful activity, a couple of very simple little strategies that I have used with people and advise people is, if you are able to sit down with your participant, bring a stack of magazines and just let them flip through the magazines and pay close attention to the things that catch their attention. And that oftentimes will give you a clue that if nothing else, you can start a conversation about and make note of that. This seemed to draw you in. This seemed to be something that you liked, right? Or, you know, hopefully when COVID settles down, you get a chance, take them to the mall and walk around the mall with them. And again, pay attention to the things that seem to draw them over or catch their attention. But it's also just as helpful in a lot of ways to just ask the question, what do you want to do? What's important to you? Because I'm telling you, many of these people have not been asked that question very often. They have been handled by experts. They have been come into programs in the past where the experts have identified what are the solutions that need to be put in place. What are the services and supports that need to be put in place? And things are provided to these people based on expert opinions and not on actually who really is the expert. So let me just see here. We've got maybe just a minute left. Had another comment from Candace saying, I appreciate this so very much as I'm just encouraging my office to have meaningful interactions with my homeless clients. It's one thing to provide space for them to be, but engagement is a powerful addition. And then Candace also says, I also suggest that relationship building creates trust, and trust is what is required for people to come and participate. We cannot assume everyone is literate or able to organize a week or thoughts or a grocery list or all kinds of other skills. So true, Candace, and I agree wholeheartedly. You know, and I think that when we're building opportunities for people to engage in activities or to connect with us, we have to keep those things in mind for sure. So with that, we're at the end of our hour, and I really appreciate people's participation and willing to engage and to talk. I hope that there's been a few nuggets that you've been able to take away from this. Just to sort of close things off, I want to share with you this slide that shows some of the upcoming webinars that we have going on for the rest of November and December. So if anything there looks interesting to you or important, and we will be having more Housing First community of practice calls down the road as well. But all of these you can find at that link where you can go in and then register for any of them. So again, thanks so much. You all are fantastic. Keep doing what you're doing, and hang in there and be patient, and you'll see amazing changes and amazing outcomes for the people that you work with. And I would also say to remember to document the tiny, tiny little successes that you see, because we often forget about those. We get focused on big change, and we miss sometimes those little bright spots that can help carry us and our participants through difficult times. So thanks again, everybody. Take care, and have a great rest of your week and weekend. Bye-bye.